We're joined tonight by political analyst Dr Fikile Vilakazi to talk more about Mangosuthu Buthelezi's legacy, the passing of the Amazulu Prime Minister and former leader of the Inkatha Freedom Party. A very good evening to you, Dr Buthelezi. Grateful for your time. So, soon after news of his death broke yesterday, the common refrain of a complex legacy was being thrown about, and many were asking, is it a cop-out, a polite way to avoid interrogating the ugly parts of his legacy?
Good evening to you and to fellow South Africans at home. It's quite a challenging time, right? Because we are mourning at the same time. I think we have to ask ourselves, what is it that we are actually mourning? Yes, there is, Umntwana kaPhindangene has passed on, but this moment is also a triggering one. For many of us who were victims, I'm one of the people that missed the guns in Soweto during the riots that took place between Inkatha Freedom Party and the African National Congress. Many of us lost our loved ones whose bodies we are still grieving up to this day, and those issues remain unresolved, Thembekile. And I can understand that when in African culture, in fact in any other culture, when there's death, they always say that let's not talk about these issues. But I think also when death occurs in this manner, particularly for a person of the stature of Umntwana kaPhindangene, we can't as a nation not engage on what that kind of death represents. So mourning in this particular context is intertwined, right? We are mourning the eldest member of the Parliament of South Africa today. At the same time, we are mourning the fact that his passing is leaving us with deeply unresolved scars, deeply unresolved wounds of the nation emanating from the Codesa negotiations, which Umntwana kaPhindangene was a part of, but also widows, and family members who were not compensated, or issues have not been addressed because of those riots, and the fragmentation of the political system, in South Africa that has resulted from those negotiations. And I think that is the kind of mourning that many of us are rising into, to say, what then, right? And we speak with humility to also say these issues have lingered so much that they've resulted into the contestations of Ingonyama Trust, which have landed even, at the family of the royal under the leadership of Ingonyama. And these are issues that we know until Umntwana kaPhindangene took his last breath, remained unresolved between him and Ingonyama. So that is the depth of the mourning that we are facing as a country, mourning really our democracy, mourning, the issues of leadership that have been sensitive, right, in terms of resolving questions that the liberation struggle has been dealing with. And I think that is what is happening, and that is what is at stake.
And you mentioned that you're one of the people who lived through the period of the violence in the 90s. For the benefit then of people who are tonight questioning why people in Gauteng townships, for example, still recount with horror what happened in areas such as Batong, let's talk about what was going on and why it is that in that violence, Buthelezi in particular has come to shoulder so much blame for the bloodshed.
Yes, we just need to remind each other that what actually happened that time, it was a negotiation that was taking place. A number of issues were at stake. One of them was the issue of the armed struggle, right, which emanated from the time when members of the liberation, leaders of the liberation struggle were taken into exile. And there was a discussion between the cohort that Umntwana kaPhindangene was a part of, people like Mandela, Pixley Kaseme, and so on, to say, are we taking arms, or not? And Umntwana kaPhindangene was one of the people that was saying, no, we don't want to fight, we don't want to take arms. And then there was an issue on the negotiation table, secondly, which was around homelands. That the apartheid government had something that we call the Bantu Administration Act of 1957, and many others that had developed these homelands, and they had sort of used a political strategy to divide and conquer, using the chiefs and the kings in the homelands to work in favor of the apartheid government, or to fulfill the agenda of the apartheid government. And Mangosuthu Umntwana found himself at the heart of that debate, where there was a proposal from the apartheid government to say, can we have the homelands like Ciskei, KwaZulu-Natal and many others take independence. And Umntwana was saying, no, we don't want independence because we, at the moment, have been weakened so much financially and otherwise that if we are becoming independent as KwaZulu-Natal, our people are going to suffer, people are going to hunger. So we need to be able to be supported by the apartheid government resources at that time, which were government of the people. And then he negotiated partial independence. And those issues really divided them with the ANCs. They didn't see eye to eye. And because of that, he was seen then as a spy of the apartheid government. He was seen as someone that was lying in the same bed with the apartheid government. And that led to the formation of the hostels that we are seeing in a number of townships, Soweto, Katlehong, Vosloorus, and so on. I grew up in Soweto, so I stayed there at that time. And in these hostels, what you would find in the apartheid police doing, they made sure that they put people from KwaZulu-Natal, in particular, members of the Inkatha Freedom Party, in those hostels, and not any other, as a strategy to know who to protect when there's these conflicts happening. So they supplied them with arms, they supplied them with machinery, with resources to be able to fight against the ANC at that time, who was the ruling party. Right. And the divisions deepened themselves. So there was that. There are those allegations, and because of that, Thembekile and fellow South Africans, and Inkatha Freedom Party continued to be seen to have contributed towards the pain of the majority of black people in South Africa. And even in the manner that Inkatha Freedom Party has a relationship with the Democratic Alliance today, continue to trigger those that kind of a history. And that is what happened. And a lot of people died. Parents died, children died, people were shot and so on. Families were fragmented and displaced. And people are widows today. And those widows have not been compensated because of those issues. And he was meant to be in the negotiations with the ANC to find resolve on these issues, the biggest part of it being the question of land. Right?
How then,
Ingonyama Trust being a result of that.
How then, Dr. Vilakazi, do we reconcile that legacy of what happened in townships in Gauteng, the many thousands of deaths of people to this day, as you're saying, when people reflect on the murders of their loved ones, still blame Mangosuthu Buthelezi? I mean, yesterday, shortly after news broke, people were recounting stories of horror, as they say. Gangs of his armed supporters allegedly roamed the streets, and people would have to basically switch off their lights, hide under kitchen tables. They say there was fear at train stations whenever you'd hear that these gangs of men were basically coming into areas such as Bipatong. You hear that, right? And then you speak to people who remember him very fondly. They remember him as a formidable leader of Inkatha who built it up to what it was, to the point where the party, in fact, without him as its face, some say would not be easily distinguishable. People who credit him for helping the various leaders of the AmaZulu nation, right from King Goodwill Zwelithini, to the Queen Regent Mantombi, and now the son Misuzulu Zwelithini. And people say, well, that's the legacy they remember, but how do the two intersect?
I think if you speak as a Zulu person, right, if you identify as Umzulu under the kingdom or the leadership of the royal family, I can understand why the majority of the Zulu nation would say that, because that's exactly what he did. He founded Inkatha Freedom Party, and many members that joined Inkatha Freedom Party from the black majority came from KwaZulu-Natal. So it became a tribalist political party, right? And of course, he made sure as part of the negotiations that we are not going to even enter this democracy, these elections. In fact, he came in the last hour, mainly because we want to make sure that we are given this land and our demands are met. And that meant that taking care of isizwe samaZulu in the manner that it looks today. So maintaining the power of the royal family and the kingdom itself. And it's something that he fought for. So he worked very, very hard over the years to make sure that nothing disturbs that arrangement. And in that doing, he then played a role of a unifier. And he said to the members of the Inkatha Freedom Party, never again should we pick up arms to resolve political issues. Perhaps we should negotiate. And I think at some point you would have seen that he did apologize with tears, of course, for what happened in the townships, in the 80s and the 90s. And so there was that. But what we need to do, Thembekile and fellow South Africans, is something that we have been saying. The president has got a constitutional responsibility to call a national referendum And I want to say this, that this problem of the 90s was not just a problem in Inkatha Freedom Party. The ANC was involved. This was a war that happened between the ANC and the IFP. And I think the ANC needs to be equally held accountable. And now that ANC is government, ANC, we've been saying this, why don't you call a national referendum that calls on the black people, the majority of the country, and ask us as a nation to say, how do we heal these wounds? So much happened in this country when people were in exile. They don't know what happened under the leadership of Mama Uwini Madikizela Mandela. She knew that, but when they came back, they alienated her and many other comrades under the United Democratic Front who were leading this struggle, who were part of these loggerheads that happened in the 90s. Call a national referendum. The Constitution gives the president the power to do that. Speak to the majority of the black people. F.W. de Klerk did that when we were transitioning into apartheid during Kodesa. He did a white-only national referendum so that he can avoid war. We can do that. South Africans are ready to speak, to say, how do you want to see this democracy unfolding? What are the wounds that need to be healed? And I think once we do that, Thembelihle, we probably will get into a better place of healing and resolving these unresolved questions.
Dr. Fikile Vilakazi, good to speak to you tonight on News at Prime. Thank you so much for your time.